I sat at a dinner table with 33 relatives, surrounded by laughter, food, and flashing phone cameras, and somehow, I was completely invisible. No one saved me a seat. No one asked how I was doing. Then my mom stood up, walked to the wall, and started pulling family photos out of their frames. She didn't look angry. She looked relieved. When she threw them into the trash and finally said my name, the room went silent. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just stood up and walked out. A week later, my phone wouldn't stop ringing that I almost didn't go to that dinner. Not because I was busy, but because a part of me was tired of hoping. Every time my mom organized a big family event, I told myself this one will be different. This time, I believed it more than usual. 33 relatives under one roof didn't sound like chaos to me, it sounded like a reset. Like maybe, just maybe, this dinner was her way of pulling me back in. I stood in front of my mirror longer than I want to admit, changing outfits, smoothing wrinkles that didn't matter, practicing a smile that looked natural instead of nervous. I even brought a gift, nothing expensive, just thoughtful. Something that said, I belong here too. On the drive over, I replayed old memories, the good ones, convincing myself they still counted. My mom's house was glowing when I arrived. Lights everywhere. Cars lining the street. Laughter spilling out before I even rang the doorbell. For a moment, my chest felt warm. That sound, family, was something I'd missed more than I realized. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, carrying hope like something fragile I didn't want to drop. People were already hugging, catching up, shouting names across rooms. I scanned faces, waiting for someone, anyone, to lock eyes with me and smile. I told myself not to overthink it. Big families are loud. Chaotic. Easy to get lost in. I clung to that thought as I walked further in, believing that once dinner started, once we all sat together, things would fall into place. I didn't know yet that this wasn't a reunion. It was a reckoning. The moment I stepped fully into the living room, I realized how wrong I'd been. 33 relatives were packed into that space, shoulder to shoulder, laughing loudly, talking over one another like they hadn't seen each other in years. But as I stood there, coat still on, gift clutched in my hand, no one looked my way. Conversations flowed around me, not toward me, like I was a piece of furniture they'd all agreed to ignore. I tried to insert myself naturally, hovering near a group of cousins I'd grown up with. I smiled, waited for a pause, opened my mouth to speak, but the conversation shifted, backs turned slightly, just enough to shut me out. It happened again near the kitchen. An aunt reached past me for a serving tray without acknowledging I was there at all. I felt invisible in a room where I shared blood with everyone. The laughter felt different up close. Sharper. Like an inside joke I wasn't part of anymore. I caught fragments of conversations, vacations I wasn't invited to, group chats I'd never been added to, memories that didn't include me. Each sentence landed quietly, stacking on top of the last, building a weight I didn't know how to shake. I kept telling myself it was temporary. That once dinner started, once people settled, things would change. Big gatherings were messy like that. You had to find your place. But as minutes passed and no one made space for me, the truth started creeping in. These weren't familiar faces acting distracted. They were familiar faces who'd already decided I didn't belong. When my mom finally called everyone to the dining room, chairs scraped loudly against the floor as people rushed to claim their spots. Couples slid in together, siblings pulled out chairs for each other, and kids were guided into seats that had clearly been planned ahead of time. I stood there for a second, scanning the long table, waiting for someone to gesture toward an empty chair and say my name. No one did. Every place setting seemed intentional. Name cards handwritten in neat ink, plates already arranged, conversations continuing without pause as people sat. I walked slowly along the table, pretending to look for something specific, when really I was just searching for proof that I'd been expected. The only empty chair was at the far end, slightly angled away, tucked beside a stack of folded high chairs. I pulled it out myself and sat down. The chair wobbled, one leg shorter than the others, rocking every time I shifted my weight. I laughed softly under my breath, hoping someone would notice and offer to switch, but the sound disappeared under the noise of clinking glasses and overlapping voices. I adjusted my napkin and tried to settle in like this was normal. Plates began passing from one end of the table to the other. Dishes skipped over me naturally, as if my hands weren't even there. I had to ask twice for the bread, my voice barely loud enough to cut through the chatter. When someone finally passed it down, they didn't look at me, just slid it across the table like an afterthought. I sat there, balancing on that uneven chair, realizing the truth I'd been avoiding. No one forgot to save me a seat. They simply never planned for me to have one. Once everyone was seated, the room settled into a steady rhythm of noise. Forks clinked against plates, glasses were refilled, and stories overlapped in that familiar way families do when they're comfortable. I watched it all from my corner of the table, nodding along, smiling at jokes that weren't meant for me. Every now and then, I leaned forward, ready to speak, but the moment passed before I could. I tried anyway. I commented on a story my uncle was telling, something light, something easy. He didn't hear me, or pretended not to. His eyes slid right past mine and locked onto someone else, continuing as if I'd never opened my mouth. My words hung in the air for half a second before dissolving. No one reacted. No pause. No acknowledgement. Dishes kept moving around the table, but somehow they always skipped me. A bowl of potatoes went from my left to my right without stopping. When I reached out, it was already gone. Someone laughed loudly, clapping their hands, and the attention shifted further away from me. I felt like I was shrinking, folding inward to take up less space. At one point, my mom stood behind my sister, resting her hands on her shoulders, smiling proudly as she listened to her talk. My dad leaned in, laughing, fully engaged. I watched them from a few feet away, close enough to hear every word, yet completely outside of it. That hurt more than the silence. I wasn't being attacked. I wasn't being confronted. I was being erased, slowly, deliberately, and in front of everyone that I excused myself from the table under the pretense of getting more water, needing a reason to stand up and breathe. As I walked down the hallway, the noise from the dining room faded, replaced by a quieter kind of pressure in my chest. That's when I noticed the wall. It was lined with framed photographs, arranged carefully, like a timeline of our family's happiest moments. I slowed down, recognizing faces and dates. Birthdays. Graduations. Holidays. My siblings appeared again and again, smiling at the camera, arms wrapped around cousins, parents standing proudly behind them. There were group shots from vacations I'd never been told about, candid photos from gatherings I hadn't been invited to. Each frame felt deliberate, curated. I kept walking, scanning for myself, certain I must have missed something. A childhood photo. A blurry shot from years ago. Anything. But as I reached the end of the hallway, the truth settled in heavy and undeniable. I wasn't there. Not once. Not in the background. Not half-cropped at the edge. It was as if I'd never existed. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at my own absence. In that quiet hallway, it finally clicked. This dinner wasn't about bringing everyone together. It was about celebrating a family version where I didn't fit. And suddenly, the empty seat made sense. When I walked back into the dining room, conversations were already swelling again, louder than before, like nothing had paused in my absence. I slid back into my chair, careful not to draw attention, my mind still stuck on the empty spaces I'd seen on the wall. I kept my eyes on my plate, telling myself to just get through the meal. That's when my mom stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor, cutting through the noise. Gradually, the room quieted. Forks paused mid-air. Everyone turned toward her with expectant smiles, the kind reserved for a toast or a sentimental speech. My heart lifted despite myself. Maybe this was it. Maybe she was about to say something that would explain everything. She cleared her throat and looked around the table, her gaze moving deliberately from face to face. When her eyes finally landed on me, they didn't soften. They hardened. The air in the room shifted instantly, like someone had opened a door in winter. I felt every pair of eyes swing in my direction, curiosity buzzing. "I'm glad everyone could make it tonight," she said, her voice tight but controlled. Then she gestured toward the hallway behind me. "Everyone who actually shows up for this family." A few people chuckled awkwardly. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a toast. It was a setup. She stepped away from the table and walked down the hallway. Seconds later, she returned carrying 2 framed photos from the wall. Without hesitation, she set them down hard on the table, the glass rattling. One by one, she lifted them, turned them over, and slid them toward the trash bin near the kitchen. "I'm done pretending," she said, her eyes locked on mine. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't acknowledgement. It was public execution. The room went completely silent after she said that. Not the awkward kind of silence where someone clears their throat or laughs nervously, but the heavy kind, the kind that presses against your ears. My mom stood there with her hand resting on the back of a chair, breathing hard, like she'd been holding this in for years and finally let it loose. Every eye in the room stayed on her, waiting. "You've always been like this," she continued, her voice rising now, sharper with every word. "Taking and taking, never giving anything back." She pointed at me, her finger trembling, not with fear, but with conviction. "You show up when it's convenient for you, then disappear when things get hard. We're tired of carrying you." I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. My throat felt tight, like it had closed itself off to protect me. She didn't wait anyway. She never did. "You drain the energy out of this family," she said. "You suck the joy out of every room you walk into." Someone across the table shifted uncomfortably, but no one interrupted her. No one defended me. She grabbed another frame from the table, this one showing a family vacation, everyone smiling under a bright blue sky. "These moments happen because we worked for them," she said, shaking the frame slightly. "Not because of you." Then she dropped it into the trash. The sound of glass hitting plastic echoed louder than it should have. My chest burned. Not from anger, from humiliation. This wasn't a private argument. This wasn't concern or tough love. This was theater. A performance designed to remind everyone exactly where I stood. I looked around the table, searching for a single face that looked unsure, sympathetic, anything. I didn't find one. Some stared down at their plates. Others watched like spectators. "You've been nothing but a burden," she finished, her voice finally cracking, not with regret, but with release. "And I'm done pretending otherwise." The words settled into the room like dust after something shatters. No one moved. No one spoke. And in that moment, something inside me went very quiet. Not broken, just still. Because when someone tells you, in front of 33 people, that you've never truly belonged, there's nothing left to argue. There was only one thing left to decide. For a brief second, I thought my dad might say something. He'd been quiet through all of it, staring down at his plate, jaw tight, hands clasped together like he was holding himself in place. I waited for him to look up, to clear his throat, to step in and slow this down. He'd done that before. Not often, but enough to give me hope. Instead, he stood up. His chair scraped back just as loudly as my mom's had, snapping the room's attention toward him. He didn't look at me at first. He looked at her. Then he nodded. A small, firm nod that felt heavier than anything she'd said. "She's right," he said, his voice calm, almost tired. "We've let this go on for too long." That was it. No hesitation. No question. No attempt to understand. He finally turned toward me, his expression closed off, like he'd already made peace with whatever this would cost. "You always make yourself the victim," he continued. "But you never stop to think about what you put everyone else through." I felt something give way in my chest. This wasn't anger or disappointment. This was confirmation. If my mom's words felt like a public execution, my dad's agreement was the final signature. The approval that made it official. He crossed his arms and leaned back against the table. "Maybe it's time you stopped showing up just to remind us of everything that's wrong," he said. A few people nodded subtly. No one spoke up. No one challenged him. I realized then that I'd been waiting for permission to matter, from people who had already decided I didn't. And that hurt more than the yelling ever could. That I could have handled the shouting. I could have handled the accusations, the raised voices, even the silence that followed. What I wasn't prepared for was my sister. She hadn't said a word through any of it. She just sat there, watching, her eyes flicking between my parents and me like she was waiting for the moment she'd been promised. When my dad finished speaking, she finally leaned back in her chair and smiled. Not a big smile. Not an obvious one. Just a small, satisfied smirk that told me everything. She tapped her fork against her plate lightly and said, "Well, that was a long time coming." Her tone was casual, almost bored, like this was a conversation she'd rehearsed in her head. I looked at her, searching for something familiar, some trace of the sister I used to know. All I saw was distance. She stood up and moved toward the kitchen, passing behind my chair. As she did, she leaned down just enough for me to hear her whisper, "You always take up too much space." That sentence landed harder than anything else that night. It wasn't loud. It wasn't meant for the room. It was precise. Personal. She straightened up and continued walking, already dismissing me like I was yesterday's problem. No one reacted. No one told her to stop. A few people avoided looking at me altogether. That's when I understood something that hurt in a different way. This wasn't just my parents' anger. It was relief. Relief that I was finally being pushed out loud, that I didn't stand up right away. I sat there for a moment longer, letting the silence settle, letting everyone see that I was still there. No one looked back at me. Conversations didn't restart, but neither did anyone reach for me. It was like the room was holding its breath, waiting for me to do exactly what they expected. So I did something they didn't. I slowly folded my napkin and placed it on the table, smoothing it out carefully, as if the smallest detail still mattered. I pushed my chair back and stood up without a word. The sound echoed, louder than I intended, but no one flinched. My mom didn't turn around. My dad kept his arms crossed. My sister was already scrolling on her phone. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I'd expected shaking, tears, something dramatic. Instead, there was a strange calm, like my body had decided this was over before my mind caught up. I looked around the table one last time, 33 faces, some uncomfortable, some curious, some completely indifferent. No one said my name. I walked toward the door, each step slow and deliberate. I half expected someone to call out, to ask me to wait, to say this had gone too far. I even paused with my hand on the doorknob, just long enough to give them the chance. The room stayed silent. When I stepped outside, the cold air hit my face hard, sharp enough to pull the breath from my lungs. I stood there for a second, staring at the quiet street, listening to muffled laughter restart inside the house. Dinner was continuing. Christmas was continuing. Just without me. I walked to my car and sat behind the wheel without turning the engine on. That's when it finally hit me, not as pain, but as clarity. I hadn't been pushed out. I'd been released. And for the first time that night, no one was ignoring me anymore. Because I wasn't there to be ignored, the days after the dinner blurred together in a way that felt unreal, like time had lost its shape. I woke up each morning expecting my phone to be full of messages, questions, apologies, something, but it stayed silent. No calls. No texts. Not even anger. The absence felt louder than the shouting had been. I replayed that night over and over, usually in the quiet hours when sleep wouldn't come. Every word my mom said echoed sharper in my head without the noise of the room to soften it. I wondered if I should have spoken up sooner, defended myself harder, stayed longer. Guilt has a way of rewriting events until you start questioning your own memory. Christmas came and went without ceremony. No invitations. No check-ins. I ate alone, the house too quiet, the decorations feeling pointless. I watched families on TV hugging, laughing, arguing, and making up, and felt something hollow open up in my chest. Not anger. Grief. Grief for the version of family I kept hoping would eventually exist. By the end of the week, the loneliness settled in deeper. It wasn't just missing them, it was realizing how long I'd been missing them, even when I was still physically present. I'd spent years trying to earn a place that had never really been mine. And in that silence, a thought crept in that scared me with how true it felt. If they could erase me so easily, maybe walking away wasn't abandonment. Maybe it was survival. It happened on a quiet morning, the kind where the world feels suspended, like it's waiting for something to break the stillness. I was standing in my kitchen, staring at my phone on the counter, not expecting it to light up anymore. By then, I'd accepted the silence as permanent. That's when the screen buzzed. Then buzzed again. And again. I picked it up slowly, my stomach tightening as notifications stacked on top of each other. Missed calls. Text messages. Voicemails. All from numbers I knew by heart. My dad's name appeared first, 5 missed calls in under 10 minutes. Then my sister. Then my mom. The one I hadn't heard from at all since the dinner. I opened my dad's messages first. They were long. Rambling. Confused. Where are you? Why won't you answer? We need to talk about what happened. No apology. Just urgency. Like something was wrong and I was expected to fix it. My sister's messages were shorter. Defensive. You didn't have to make such a big deal out of it. Mom's really upset. You embarrassed everyone. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering, unsure how to feel. Relief didn't come. Neither did satisfaction. What I felt was distance, like these messages were coming from another life I'd already stepped out of. Then my mom's name appeared, and my chest tightened again. Her message was different. Just one line. Please call me. No explanation. No accusation. No warmth either. Just desperation stripped down to its simplest form. I locked the phone and set it face down on the counter, my hands suddenly shaking. For a full hour, I didn't respond. I sat there, replaying everything, her words, my dad's agreement, my sister's smirk, the door closing behind me. Part of me wanted to believe this was remorse. Another part recognized it for what it really was. They didn't miss me. They missed what I provided. When I finally picked the phone back up, I didn't rush to explain myself. I didn't apologize for leaving. I didn't soften anything. For the first time in my life, I understood something clearly. Silence had given me power. And whatever I said next would change everything. That I didn't find out what happened next all at once. It came in pieces, through other people, through half explanations and uncomfortable pauses. The kind of information no one volunteers unless they have to. Apparently, the dinner didn't end the way my parents imagined it would. Once I left, the tension didn't disappear with me. It stayed. It just changed targets. My mom tried to keep things going, forcing conversation, refilling drinks that didn't need refilling. But without me there to focus on, people started noticing the cracks. Arguments broke out in the kitchen over seating, over food, over old grudges that had nothing to do with me. A cousin left early. An aunt locked herself in the bathroom crying. The perfect family image started collapsing under its own weight. Then came the practical consequences. The next day, my parents realized how much I'd quietly been handling for years. Bills I'd been helping organize were overdue. A commitment I'd made on their behalf fell through. A favor they assumed I'd take care of was suddenly no one's responsibility. They asked my sister. She refused. Said it wasn't her problem. That's when the questions started. Where did they go? Why haven't they called? Do you think they're serious this time? The same people who watched me be humiliated in silence suddenly felt uncomfortable with the silence itself. It turned out, I wasn't just easy to ignore. I'd been easy to rely on. By midweek, the story had shifted. It wasn't about what they said to me anymore. It was about how I overreacted. How I misunderstood. How I should have known it wasn't meant that way. Accountability has a funny way of disappearing when it starts to feel inconvenient. But underneath all of that, something else was happening. Regret. Not loud. Not honest. Just enough to sting. They realized that pushing me out didn't bring relief. It brought exposure. They were left with each other, and all the issues they'd been using me to distract from. For the first time, my absence spoke louder than my presence ever had. And they didn't know how to fix it, because fixing it would mean admitting they were wrong that I didn't respond to everyone. I didn't even open most of the messages again. I let them sit there, unread, unanswered, while I tried to understand what I actually wanted. Not what would calm them down. Not what would make things easier. What I needed. By the end of the day, there was only one message I kept coming back to. My mom's. Please call me. Nothing else. No apology. No explanation. Just that. I stared at it for a long time, feeling the familiar pull of obligation tug at me. That instinct to fix things, to smooth things over, to make sure everyone else was okay. I recognized it now for what it was, and that made it easier to resist. I didn't call her. I typed instead. I rewrote the message 3 times before sending it, deleting anything that sounded defensive or emotional. When I finally hit send, it was calm. Clear. Unapologetic. I told her that what happened at the dinner was unacceptable. That humiliating me in front of 33 people wasn't concern, it was cruelty. That my dad backing her and my sister's behavior made it clear this wasn't a misunderstanding. I told her I needed space. Real space. Not a few days. Not until things calmed down. Space until I could trust that I wouldn't be treated like a problem again. I said I wasn't disappearing to punish anyone, I was stepping back to protect myself. The reply didn't come right away. When it finally did, it was long and emotional and carefully vague. She talked about stress. About intentions. About how hard it was to be a parent. She never said the words I'd needed my entire life. I'm sorry. And for the first time, I didn't chase it. I didn't explain myself further. I didn't argue. I set my boundary, closed the conversation, and sat with the discomfort. It wasn't easy. But it was honest. And as uncomfortable as it felt, there was something steady underneath it. I had finally stopped asking them to see me. I was seeing myself instead. For a long time, I thought choosing myself meant burning bridges. Yelling. Cutting people off dramatically. Making sure everyone knew how much they'd hurt me. What I learned instead was quieter. Choosing yourself doesn't always look strong from the outside. Sometimes it looks like stepping back and letting people feel the absence they created. Walking away from that dinner didn't fix my family. It didn't suddenly make them kinder or more self-aware. What it did was break a pattern I'd been trapped in for years. I stopped volunteering for pain. I stopped explaining my worth to people who were invested in misunderstanding me. That shift mattered more than any apology ever could. There are days I still feel the ache of it. Holidays are different now. Smaller. Quieter. Sometimes lonely. But they're also honest. I no longer sit at tables where my presence is tolerated instead of welcomed. I don't shrink myself to keep the peace. I don't wait for permission to exist. The truth is, families don't always change when you set boundaries. Sometimes they double down. Sometimes they pretend nothing happened. Sometimes they blame you for reacting instead of themselves for causing it. And that hurts. But it also clarifies things in a way nothing else can. If you've ever felt invisible in a room full of people who were supposed to love you, I want you to hear this: leaving doesn't make you ungrateful. It doesn't make you cold. It doesn't mean you didn't try hard enough. It means you finally listened to what your pain was telling you. That night, I didn't lose my family. I lost the version of myself that kept begging to be chosen. And that was the beginning of everything else.